Hey there, my fellow author. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, an old soul kind of writer living my dream as a full-time author and authorpreneur. But I didn't start out living a confident, creative lifestyle. I struggled with the fears and the mental and emotional barriers that so often plague writers at all stages of their author career. But the truth is that with the right knowledge, tools, and training, you can overcome those barriers. I'm here to teach you how I've developed a lifestyle that's allowed me to publish 19 books and counting. Each week, as you tune into the Confident Fiction Author podcast, you'll get clarity on the steps you need to take to advance your writing career. Whether it's developing your ideal writing routine, tackling new skills like dictating your fiction, or overcoming the obstacles life throws your way, this podcast will help you live a more confident, creative lifestyle. Let's get started. Hey there, my friend, and welcome to this week's episode of the Confident Fiction Author podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, and today I am going to talk to you about how to dictate your next novel. I know I've mentioned dictation several times on the podcast, and if you've been around me in my newsletters or on Facebook or anywhere on fictioncourses.com, you know that I love to dictate my fiction and I love to teach other authors how to dictate their fiction. Because when I was starting out, there wasn't anyone around to help me. I read a few books on how to dictate fiction. I heard authors on podcasts just share how they were dictating fiction. And I say how they were dictating fiction. They shared that they were dictating fiction, but not necessarily how to do it. And once I finally unlocked some things in my brain, trained my brain to do it, got tools that would work for me, because those were my two biggest hurdles in dictating fiction, I was able to begin dictating. And I have not looked back. I have not gone back to typing. I have dictated 11 of my published books, and I've dictated a couple of others that are coming up for publication. And I just genuinely love being able to speak my words, see them appear on the page. It has not affected my creative style, and I even have a training for that now on how to dictate without losing your author voice. So I'm very grateful that I finally overcame that. And honestly, what led me into teaching dictating fiction, because it never occurred to me that I would be doing this or that I could do it or even that I should do it. I was just so glad to finally have mastered it after all of the years of trying and failing and working through the mental hurdles and all of dictating my fiction. What inspired me to teach it actually is I created my first digital course called Fiction Writing American Indians, and that was to guide authors in how to accurately and respectfully include Native American characters in their stories. Many of you know that I'm a tribal member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, so this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. All of my fiction, the main characters are Native American, and it is something that I have taught on for some years, and I created that as a digital course. I got on some podcasts to share about my course and invite authors to come and join that, which, by the way, if you're interested, you can find that course over at fictioncourses.com/American Indians. I also have a free ebook on 5 stereotypes to avoid when writing Native Americans. But that aside, so I got on some podcasts through that, and one of the podcast hosts, we got on the topic of dictation. I mentioned that I was dictating all of my fiction, and the podcast host just really zeroed in on that. And he started asking me, well, how did you learn how to dictate? And, how do you actually make that transition from typing to speaking your words? Like, what does that practically look like when you sit down for your writing session? And so it really forced me to articulate what my process was. And I tried to just be really brief about it, because I was like, well, we're not here to talk dictation, which is fine. I've always open about talking about my writing processes, but I was like, well, let me just, and I honestly didn't know how to explain how I dictated fiction. And so he just kept coming at me with questions of, okay, well, so you record and then you transcribe, and then what does that look like? How do you get that over to your writing software? And yada, yada. And just kept getting into really forcing me to articulate how I dictate fiction. And that got me to thinking, how do I do it? And how can I teach others to do it? Because something happened whenever I first started dictating, and when I really, not when I first started, but when I really mastered it and I was taking off with it and I was dictating all of my fiction. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe how awesome dictation is and all of the benefits that I didn't realize would come along with being able to do it. And so I started sharing it with friends. And I had one friend that, I told her about it. And so she went off and she tried to do it, and she came back and said, yeah, that was a really big mess. I don't think dictation is for me. So, I'm going to pass. And I felt so bad because I was like, no, that's exactly what I did. Is I tried it, I failed. And then I was like, okay, just won't work for me. And I realized I had sent her crashing against the rocks, and I felt really bad about that. So I tried not to do that to other authors. But after that podcast interview, it got me thinking. I had done my first course, and I was like, what if I could find a way to teach authors how to dictate? Like, what would that look like? Do I create a course? Do I do live trainings, workshops, like in person, digital? What does this look like? And so it took me some months of thinking about that before I put together my first dictation training. And that became my dictation boot camp for authors. I launched it in April of 2023. That was the first boot camp. And since then, I've done 6 of those. I've had over 800 authors go through my boot camps, and it is always phenomenal to see those authors, be able to guide them through the first steps in being able to dictate their fiction. So mastering dictating fiction takes a little longer, but just getting those first steps and getting that courage and inspiration and confidence of knowing that you can dictate your fiction is so powerful. And that's what my dictation bootcamp is about. I'll share a little more about it at the end, but it is open for enrollment right now. It's over at fictioncourses.com/dictation bootcamp. I would love to see you in there. So all of that said, I do want to spend this podcast just teaching you some of the first steps of dictating your fiction. And again, I hope to see you in the boot camp so that we can really dig into this together. But for this episode, you're going to walk away with some understanding around dictation, some of the misconceptions. You're going to learn some of the benefits of dictating your story, which goes beyond writing faster. That's something that is a really hot topic today, but the speed of being able to get your fiction out. But there are so many more benefits to dictating your fiction. So you're going to learn that today. I'm going to talk about the blocks that keep authors from dictating, and these are all ones that I experienced. I already shared a couple of them, but we're going to break those apart. And then I'm going to give you some tools of dictation. And hint, hint, you don't need to go out and spend hundreds of dollars on dictation software. So you are going to be able to have some tools right on hand that you can use to dictate your fiction. So I'm going to talk about that. And then I'm going to talk about the 3 methods that I've used to dictate my fiction. And so this just kind of gets you thinking about, mentally how you want to approach dictation and some things to consider, the pros and cons of these 3 methods. And then at the end, I'm going to answer the big dictation question. And I already alluded to it, something that my friend went through experience. So I'm going to articulate that big dictation question, and then I'm going to give you an answer so that you can decide, is it worth your time and money to invest in dictation training? And do you want to make that transition? Is it worth it to make that transition from typing your fiction to speaking it? As you can probably tell, I am very passionate about this topic, and I can't wait to dig into it for the first time really on the podcast where we're dedicating this whole episode to dictating your next novel. So that said, let's get into it. All right, before you dictate your novel, you may be asking yourself some questions or even had other people ask you these questions. So other authors, you may have mentioned your desire to dictate your fiction, and they may have come back with some challenging questions like, is dictation real writing? Like, can you still call yourself an author? This may be a question you're asking yourself. I know it was a question I asked myself. I didn't really hear it from anyone else, but I just asked myself, am I still an author? Can I still say I'm a writer if I'm speaking my words instead of typing them? So to answer this question, the answers that I came up with for myself, I want to share those answers for you so that if someone is asking you that, or if you're asking yourself, can you still be called an author if you're dictating? These are the answers that I came up with. First, we're going to reach way back in history, like thousands and thousands of years. And I look to my own tribe, the Choctaw Nation, and oral storytelling is one of our traditions that we still maintain today. That's how stories were passed down through my people for generations. We did not have a written language, so speaking stories was how they were preserved. It's how they were passed down. Life lessons were taught through those. And so in a sense, with me, with dictation, I did have some oral storytelling training, and I just love how with dictation, I'm able to use a bit of that and also keep that tradition of telling stories and speaking stories. So that is something that is pretty much in every culture around the world since the dawn of human history. And then I look to King Solomon, who was considered one of the wisest men who ever lived. And it says in the Bible that he spoke 3,000 proverbs. And I remember halting on that when I read it. And I thought, that sounds like he dictated it, like he was speaking to a scribe who was taking down his proverbs that he was speaking. And we know at least some of those were written as in a whole book of them. And I just love the idea that dictation, when you think about kings and pharaohs and all, they typically didn't do their own writing. They dictated it to a scribe who took it down word for word. So they weren't just giving them ideas and all, and they would go and write something. They were dictating the actual sentences and all of the words that they wanted written down. Bring that forward to especially the 20th century where we have, professionals and they have their secretaries. And I think about the old TV show, Beverly Hillbillies, which I grew up watching, the old black and white. And I would think about Mr. Drysdale and his secretary, Jane Hathaway. And that's what he would do. And there was an office scene, like he would be dictating a letter to her, word for word, and she'd be taking it down in shorthand to type up later. So dictation is not anything new. We think about that today because we're able to just dictate off text messages or reminders to Siri, and we just speak our words and the software transcribes it and there's our words on the screen. But used to, you had to have a secretary or have a scribe who took down those words. So while we think dictation and even dictating our fiction is a new concept, like it's something in the 21st century, it's really not. I think about Barbara Cartland, who wrote, I think, over 700 romance novels, and she did have an actual secretary. So this was way before the technology age that we have today. And she would dictate to a secretary who would type up her words, and that's how she wrote her fiction. And again, oral storytellers, going back even further than that. Someone also shared that John Milton wrote the epic poem Paradise Lost by dictation because he was blind. And so this idea, this question of, are you a real writer if you speak your words instead of typing them? I say that absolutely, you are still an author. I am still an author. It's my words that are pouring out of my imagination, out of my heart, and out of my soul, and onto the page. I'm just speaking it instead of typing it. And one of the challenge questions that I return to people who ask, is this real writing? Or you're not a writer, you're a speaker if you're dictating. And I would say the same thing for authors who are typing. Are you really a writer if you're not handwriting your words? Like, what is writing? And are you really just a typist rather than a writer? So those are things I just want to set that aside if you're worried about or feeling guilty about dictating instead of typing and feeling like you're not putting in the elbow grease or the physical action of writing. You absolutely are, especially as fiction writers, because our words are coming from our imaginations. They are coming from our hearts. They're coming from our experiences. And how they get on the page, whether you're picking up a quill, an ink jar, or you're typing or you're speaking, those words are coming out of you and going onto the page. So you are absolutely still a real writer if you are dictating your fiction. All right, let's dig into some of the advantages of dictating your story beyond writing faster. And I say beyond writing faster because for me, that's what drew me to dictation. If it's what's drawing you to dictation, totally legit, totally fine that that's your main goal with dictation. I went from typing an average of 1,500 words an hour of fiction, not nonfiction. I can type faster if it's a brain dump or emails or something, like I type faster. But with fiction, I would average about 1,500 words an hour. With dictating my fiction, I go an average of 3,000 words per hour. That's my average that I did. Honestly, that was my average before my writing sabbatical. So it has eased up to more like 2,500 words an hour, but still way faster than typing. And that doesn't have anything to do with my dictation. It's just my creative juices have been getting back together still from my sabbatical and just having burnout issues and all of that. So it feels really good to be back to writing chunks of fiction, but I just wanted to be upfront. And I've talked about, taking sabbaticals and burnout with that. But whenever I was in my prime with dictating and in my prime really with fiction writing a few years ago, and I'm going to get back there, but I did average about 1,500 words typing, and I went to 3,000 words average with dictating, which blew my mind. It was incredible to just run those numbers and imagine the possibilities, and then those possibilities became realities of how much writing I could get done in a day, a month, a year. So I'm really grateful that I did master dictation, and that is what drew me, was being able to write faster. What happened, though, is after I mastered dictation, I discovered there were benefits that, honestly, at this phase of my life and my writing career, are even greater than the advantage of writing faster. The second thing that really draws people to dictation, and honestly, this is almost becoming the number one thing, is health. So authors, I have a lot of authors in my community that are of the older generation, and even those of us who are younger. I've had a lot of authors who are just experiencing chronic illness, or they've had surgeries and they are really not being able to sit at their desk and type, or even just being able to physically type, even laying in bed or something. So dictation with health is becoming so important, but especially for those of the older generation who want to see their author career continue, and they're seeing dictation as the way forward as other health issues set in, to be able to continue being a writer. And that's one of the things that just really drives me with teaching dictation, is I want to see authors who may even feel a little more technically challenged with all of the new tools and technology out there. I just really like to break it down and make it very simple and accessible for them to get started with dictation, because I know we have to take care of our health, and I don't want health or health challenges to block you from continuing your writing career. So whether you're facing a current health challenge, or you're more like me, you want to be preventative and just really take the best care of your body that you can, dictation allows you to do that. You can go out and go for a walk while you're dictating your fiction. I've got a treadmill desk that I can dictate my fiction at. Typically, I do it in my big comfy chair, so it's a lot of not pressure on my body. My fastest dictation is when I'm laying down, honestly. So I'll just lay down on the couch or in the bed if I'm going to really, get into a longer writing session. And that's allowed me to write up to 4 hours in a session and knock out 11,000 words, and just my body feels great. I overall just don't feel as tired as I do if I had typed all of those words. And honestly, I wouldn't have been able to sustain that kind of pace and doing it back to back in a chunk like that of 4 hours. So health, huge benefit when it comes to dictating your novels. Another one is time management. So this is fun. The first scene that I dictated wasn't in my current work in progress that I had going. I was trying to get that story going. I had written 27,000 words. I had to scrap that. I was starting the book over, and I was like, I've got to do some backstory. I've got to get this going. And I had been working on my dictation training, and one day I had to get out the door in about 20 minutes. I had some dishes to do. I don't like to leave dishes in the sink, so I had some dishes to do. And the scene, this backstory scene, just downloaded in my brain. And I was like, oh no, I either have to run to my keyboard and make notes about this scene, because I knew there was no way I could type it fast enough. I didn't have enough time, but just to make a few notes. But I also had to get the dishes done. So it was kind of like, which one do I do? Because I had been practicing my dictation, I was like, why not? Why not just give it a shot? And so I plugged in my earbuds, which I actually don't recommend. I know some authors who have some success with using earbuds, but my audio quality is just not quite great enough for, not worth it for doing earbuds. But that's what I had. You start with what you have. And so I plugged that in. I started my dictation app that I was using and just started speaking this scene while I was doing the dishes. So that's why I used the earbuds. And I was like, just kind of not multitask, like my brain was very much in create mode. Dishes are just so automatic. So I got that done, headed out the door. And when I came back, I transcribed my words, and I had written around 1,500 words, 1,200, 1,500 words. I was blown away. And I was like, whatever it takes for me to figure out this dictation thing, I am going to do, because this is super powerful. I need this in my life. I went on to dictate that entire novel, and I just have not looked back. So time management, another huge benefit. So there are lots of other benefits when it comes to dictating. Those are the top 3, and especially for me, that I've experienced: writing faster, better for my health, and time management. So I'm going to go ahead and stop with just those 3. You can imagine what your life will look like once you have mastered dictation. So yeah, just take a minute if you want to, and just think about, once you've mastered dictation, what will that look like? Will you be able to get more words in each day because you're able to dictate while you're sitting in the carpool line or out walking the dogs, or being able to take better care of your health and do stretches while you're speaking your words? So imagine what your life will look like once you have mastered dictation. So blocks to getting started. I wanted to share these because you may be facing this. You may be at the point where you have tried dictation. You did like my friend, and you wanted to do dictation. You got something working, and you started speaking your words, and your brain just froze up. And you're like, okay, I failed at that. This is not for me. That may be where you're at today. And I totally get you. I hear you. I see you, because I was there. I have worked with hundreds of authors now who faced the same thing. They were like, I'm not sure this is going to work for me. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not going to work for me, because my brain just doesn't work that way. And so I just want to encourage you, as we're looking at blocks to dictating, that I absolutely believe you can break through those blocks and be able to dictate your next novel. It was true for me. It did take time. It did take training. It did take support. Actually, I didn't have support, and that's what I want to do for you. I want to be that support so that you can shorten the time that it took me to dictate the fiction, you can get up and going so much faster. Still may take you a few months, a year, maybe coming into the boot camp a couple of times. I've had so many repeat authors that they just come into the boot camp because they're like, I know this is it. I know I can do it. I just need more support and encouragement, more training. I need to go back through it again. So if that's you and you've been through the boot camp, I do hope you'll come back in and join me in the next one, because I truly believe if you're feeling like my brain just doesn't work that way, oh, I tried and I failed, try again. Let's do it again, because that's what it took for me, trying and failing. And I kept pushing forward, kept pushing into it, would not fully quit. I quit, but then I would try again. And so I want to be that encouragement and support for you with mastering dictation. So if you are facing blocks, whether it's technical or making that mental shift from typing to speaking your fiction, I want to be that support to help you overcome those blocks. Now, to address one of those blocks, and this is where I promise to give you some tools to dictate, that's a big block that a lot of authors have. So back in the day, we really had only one choice as fiction authors to dictate our fiction in a quote affordable way, and that was to invest in Dragon Dictation and then to train it with your voice and all. It's still a great option. It's not really available for Apple users anymore. So if you're an Apple user like me, it's not really even an option anymore. But you may already own Dragon, still great to do dictation with. But if you don't, you do not need to do that anymore. So I'm going to give you something that I normally save for my dictation bootcamp or one of my trainings. But I'm going to go ahead and give it to you here on the podcast as my faithful podcast listener, and I know that you will take this information and use it well. So on dictating your fiction, you can just use your built-in function on your phone or your computer. It doesn't matter if you have a PC or a MacBook, an iPhone or Android phone. You can use the built-in function to start dictating today. And it is as simple as opening your phone. Say you have an iPhone, which I have, and I like to demonstrate this, but it's a podcast. But if you open your phone and you go into, say, your default notes app, you tap in there, it brings up the on-screen keyboard. We're all familiar with that in a text message, an email, on your notes. When you see that on-screen keyboard, there should be a mic there. On Android, I think it's the upper right side. On iPhone, it's the lower right side. You tap that mic and it activates your dictate or your speech to text function. Once that's activated, you can start speaking your words. You may have already done this for emails or especially text messages, but a lot of authors I have found never thought about using it for their fiction. And it's the same thing on your computer. So if you're on a MacBook or you're on a PC and say you're in Microsoft Word or Scrivener, you can tap your dictation function. So on Mac, there's a little microphone on it and you tap it and it activates your dictate function. On PC, I believe for most of them, Command H works to activate that speech to text option, and you can begin speaking your words. So it doesn't require expensive or fancy software or having to be super techno geek to be able to dictate your fiction. Now, I will say there are 1,000 nuances to these built-in tools, and I go into it in the Dictation Bootcamp. The huge benefit of that is you also can go into our private Facebook group and talk about, hey, I'm having issues with getting my dictate function to come up. What can I do? And there's always folks in there who can help give some technical guidance. I'm also in there as well to really make sure that you're able to overcome this first block or this first hurdle to being able to dictate your fiction. It is the first step, and I just want to caution you, because this is what I did with my friend. I gave her that first step and she went out and tried to dictate, and then she hit the mental blocks and all of those things. And I'm like, no, I shouldn't have even given you that. So like I said, I trust you to use this wisely. Just this tip here of being able to use your built-in speech to text function, because I think you will use it well. I think you will get more training and know that if you do hit those mental blocks, that it's not you. Your brain can be trained to speak your fiction. So trust me on that. But if you do want to go ahead and play around with that, just know you don't have to buy that expensive software. You can use your built-in function on your phone or your computer. Let me cover the 3 ways or the 3 methods that I've used to dictate my fiction. And the first is watching the screen. So when I talked about, say you have your Microsoft Word pulled up and you start your dictation function, you've got that working properly, and you begin speaking your words of fiction once you've trained yourself and gotten past the mental hurdles. So you are now speaking your words of fiction and it's appearing on the page. And it's so fun to see those words just scrolling across the screen so much faster than if you were typing. Some of the advantages to that is, one, you do know your dictation function is working properly. So it hasn't crashed. It hasn't, randomly stopped on you. There's not any issues, like you're speaking words and they are appearing on the page. The other advantage to that is, I know if you're like me, authors, we typically live and die by the word count. And so that's what I really like with watching the screen is I'm watching the word count. So it's going from 100, 200, 500, 1,000 words. And I love seeing that. And then I know too, when I've hit my word count goal for the day, 1,500 words, 3,000. For some authors, it's 500 words a day. Whatever it is, when you've hit those words, and you're just getting to see that number climb so fast when you're dictating. So that's a lot of fun. One of the disadvantages to watching the screen is you are seeing errors appear. So you are going to have dictation errors. You are going to misspeak and maybe stumble around, maybe start over. You're also going to have words that it's like you're there, and so it doesn't transcribe it properly. And so also whenever you're speaking, it may not be going at the speed that you're speaking. And then all of a sudden 2 sentences will appear, or it won't do your new paragraph, and then it'll do it at the end. And so there's a lot of action happening on the screen, and I find that it jolts me out of the story. So that's one of the reasons why I now don't watch the screen. And so that's method number 2, is not watching the screen. So because of that, because of seeing all the red squiggly lines and all, and it's not that there's always a ton of them, but it's distracting to see the words and things jumping around on the screen. So method 2 is doing the same thing, live transcribe. So you're activating your dictation function, you're speaking your words, and it's appearing right on the page. What I do with that, though, is I typically don't watch the screen. And for me, it's as simple as I typically have my phone on the arm of my chair, and I will just take my glasses off. And so I can still see that there's action going on the screen. My dictate function hasn't randomly crashed or gone down on me, which is extremely rare with what I use. But I'm able to see that it is capturing my words, but I'm not seeing all of the errors. And so if you just close your eyes or shrink your screen down a little smaller where you can still see there's action going on, but you're not actually watching the screen, you're not watching the words appear. So several advantages to that. The distraction, you're also not tempted to scroll back up and edit, which is another reason why dictation is so much faster. You're able to just keep moving forward, because you're not going, your eyes aren't wandering back up the screen and reading things that you want to, I could have a better word for that, or things like that. So not watching the screen is typically how I do it now. I dictate directly into Scrivener on my iOS app, which is a whole other training. And you can actually go get that training for free. It's a mini course I have called Dictation plus Scrivener Power Combo. And it's over at fictioncourses.com/dictation. Totally free. It's a mini course that you can do if you want to see in detail my process of dictating using Scrivener. So that's how I do it now. That's how I've dictated my last couple of books. Before that, though, and now we're going to move into method number 3, I did what I call the record and transcribe later method. So my phone had this weird cutoff after 30 seconds of dictating, and I knew that wouldn't work. Again, that was one of my hurdles. And if that's one of your hurdles, we worked through that in the boot camp. But I'll just say I used this app that allowed me to record my words. And then when I finished all of my recording sessions, I would transcribe those inside the app. So it had a built-in function that it transcribed my words, and I was able to then copy and paste those over into my default notes app on my phone, and then go on my computer and copy and paste those into my Scrivener. So it was a clunkier process, and that was one of the big cons of doing the record and transcribe later method. But one of the big advantages is that was always my fastest way of dictating and getting my words in, because I could not scroll back up and do any editing. I could not be watching the word count and getting distracted by that. So all I could do was keep writing, and that was the fastest way for me to get my drafts in. So if you're someone who you struggle with editing as you go, and you're like, you really just need to get that first draft done, the record and transcribe later method, awesome way to do it. And there's different apps out there available. Unfortunately, I can't recommend the app that I used to use because it's no longer reliable in the transcription for my device. But I do have some others that I recommend, but it's really something that I have to kind of show you how to use it so that you don't get frustrated with it. And I cover some of that in the boot camp and also in my course, my Fictation course. But it's more of an advanced method. And that's why I try not to get into it too much with my trainings, because it often just confuses people unless I spend a good bit of time on it. But I did want to share, that's how I wrote my first 9 books by dictation, was using that record and transcribe later method. Okay, I know we're going a little long on this episode, but I hope you're getting some really good inspiration and just practical ways of taking those first steps with dictating your next novel. So let me ask and answer the big dictation question. And this is something that I shared at the beginning about my friend who I sent her off to try dictation. And what she came back with is she was like, this is such a mess. I don't see how this is going to benefit me, because I can't even really pull apart what I wrote, and I don't even know how to edit it. And it's just kind of freaking me out because it's such a jumbled up mess, not only in the way she was forming her sentences, but it was also the transcription, and just the whole block of text that she came out with was so discouraging. She was like, I'm not going to do dictation. I'm just not going to do it. So I'm glad it's working for you, but it's not for me. So the question is, if dictated words come out as a hot mess, is it still worth it? The short answer to that, my answer to that, is yes. And I'm going to tell you why. First, let me just say that my first scene, that backstory scene that I shared, that I dictated, it came out as a hot mess. It was a disaster. I never even went back and cleaned it up because I didn't need it. It was a backstory scene, but I had the words down, and I would not have had that had I not been able to dictate. So it was absolutely worth it. But the great thing about what I teach through the Dictation Bootcamp and my advanced trainings is you can actually get to the point where it's not a hot mess. And that's where I'm at now with my dictation. So I teach things like punctuation and articulating your words and getting the right tools and mics and all of the things that you'll want to have in your tool belt when you're dictating your fiction. So that's the first thing I want to say is my dictation doesn't come out as such a hot mess. Does it still have errors? Do I still need to do cleanup? Absolutely. And that's what I train you as well, is to do your cleanup immediately after your writing session or within a few days. When I say cleanup, I'm not talking about editing. I am talking about just doing a quick scan through what you just wrote and cleaning up any dictation errors or stumbles that you had when you were speaking and making it look as good as if you had typed the draft. Used to, when my dictation came out as a hot mess, I would be at about 50-50. So if I spent 30 minutes dictating my fiction and I spent 30 minutes cleanup, that's what I would do. I would do about 30 minutes and I would get about 1,500 words, but then it took me 30 minutes to clean it up. And I was like, this doesn't add up. I'm still at 1,500 words an hour. So what's the point of doing dictation? One, what I have found is once I trained myself with my dictation methods, I'm at about 90-10 now. So I can spend 55 minutes dictating and it only takes me about 5 or 10 minutes to clean it up. So that's when I say it's not such a hot mess once you've trained yourself. But honestly, even if I was able to dictate 1,500 words in 30 minutes, that's 30 minutes less that I was sitting at my desk on my computer typing. It's 30 minutes less work on my wrist, or maybe it's 30 minutes that I was out walking my dog. I don't have a dog, but if I was out walking my dog, that's 30 minutes that I was doing that instead of sitting at my desk typing. I'm only sitting at my desk doing that 30 minutes of cleanup. Again, it greatly reduces with your training. It doesn't come out to be such a hot mess, but even if it did, it would still be worth it. It would still be worth it for the time benefit, the health benefit, and really just the ease and breaking through blocks on your story. Like, I didn't even talk about that as one of the benefits, but I have authors who just are really facing blocks in their story, especially through that muddy middle. And I have a training on that as well with dictation, but that muddy middle dictation really helps you push through that in ways that typing just can't. So to answer that question, if dictated words came out a hot mess, is it still worth it? My opinion, absolutely. And I also want to share that my friend who I sent out to crash against the rocks at first with dictation, she came into a couple of my trainings to actually assist me with the boot camp and help support authors who were in there. And she started doing the assignments and she found herself being able to dictate. And so now she dictates fiction with confidence. And I'm so proud. It feels redemptive for me after having sent her off with no training that once she actually went through my trainings, she is now able to dictate fiction. So I thought I would end with that happy note and just encourage you that if you ever went off, if someone encouraged you to go to try dictation, whether from a podcast or a book, or you just heard about it and you tried to do some dictation and you backed off, you're like, this is a hot mess. My brain doesn't work that way. I don't have the technical experience and confidence. I can't do dictation. I want to invite you again into my dictation bootcamp for authors. It's just $37 and you can enroll over at fictioncourses.com/dictation bootcamp. That is your opportunity to come in and take those first steps to dictating your next novel. I got to cover some of that here in the podcast, but it is just a different atmosphere when you are able to get around fellow authors who are on the same journey as you. So we meet via Zoom for 30 to 45 minutes. I do the training. I get to share my screen, which I don't with the podcast, but I get to share my screen and just show you how some of these tools work. And then we move into the mental transition of being able to speak your words instead of typing them. And the last day of the boot camp is writing your first scene of fiction. So the boot camp does take you through those first steps of dictating your next novel. I hope to see you in there, even if you've been through a previous boot camp and you need that fresh inspiration and someone to just pour some confidence into you. That's what I want to be for you during the dictation boot camp for authors. Again, it's just $37 and you can enroll over at fictioncourses.com/dictation bootcamp. That is all for this week, my friend. I will see you in the next episode of the Confident Fiction Author podcast. Take care.